I'm a born and raised East Austin girl. I was born in 1977 at the old Brackenridge Hospital. My folks made their way to Austin by way of rural Arkansas. My dad was a musician. My mom was also an artist. And Austin was a place that they made their way to by way of the Kerrville Folk Festival. And Austin didn't just accept them, didn't tolerate them, but it embraced them. And so this is my home, and it's a place that I love. I moved away for college. I went to Arizona for a couple years, and then I worked for an organization called Project Vote Smart in Montana for about 6 months. All that to say, otherwise, I've been an Austin girl my whole life.
Awesome. And what do you do now?
So my company, East Austin Advocates, we started it just after I got a cancer diagnosis in 2014. I like to call it my health opportunity. I always knew my why. My why was to transcend cyclical poverty. I knew as a kid who grew up relying on public services, who watched my mom struggle and do everything right, but with very little support, trying to raise 5 kids on the east side of Austin, she just could not get past the cyclical poverty. And so I knew my why was to transcend poverty. I thought my how was I was going to get rich. I was going to make a bunch of money, and we were going to philanthropy our way out of this mess that we're in. But it turns out, I got the diagnosis of lupus on a Monday and cancer on a Friday. And I decided in that moment that I was going to give myself permission to live a life that was joyful, that was purposeful, that was authentic, and where I was going to leave a legacy my kids could be proud of. If at the age of 36 I was questioning my mortality, I wanted to know that these kids were going to grow up in a city where they were going to be proud of what their mom produced in the city. And so I started East Austin Advocates by way of driving around to these projects right around here. I went to Marshall, Booker T, Mount Carmel, Rosewood Courts, and I just started asking people, what do you need? How can I help you? And the first couple people who let me in basically made the way for East Austin Advocates to help people to mitigate shortages of all the kinds. And so East Austin Advocates is my baby, but I also am the president for the East 12th Street Merchants Association, where we help to advocate for merchants in the corridor.
Okay. And when was the cancer diagnosis?
September 2014. I've been no evidence of disease, they call it NED, since March of 2015, which, an interesting story, my friend pointed it out. He said, your surgery date was a command. It was March 4th, 2015. And I've been marching forth ever since, and here we are.
Awesome. Just for the heck of it, talk about this spot. Why did you pick this spot? Why is this important?
I picked this spot for a couple reasons. I like to talk about how representation matters. I've got 3 brown daughters who are watching me move in the world, and I need them to know that representation is important. They need to see Black women in leadership roles, and so that's one of the reasons I'm running for office. But I picked this particular spot because I know Austin's history. We are old enough to have made a lot of mistakes, but young enough to get it right. But if we don't talk about our racist, segregationist past, then we don't fix it. And so this gentleman here, Mr. Madison, same last name, he was appointed in the 1870s as an alderman, otherwise known as a council person. And he was a person that loved this city and that loved this state and really wanted to show up as a Texan. And so this house, which he built in the 1870s on Old East 11th Street, was resurrected in the 70s and donated by the family to the city of Austin. They disassembled it and rebuilt it right here in Rosewood Park.
Awesome. So you're out there, you're doing East Austin Advocates. What was it that made you say, I got to run for council, I got to get in this game?
Multiple things. Primarily, in my role with East Austin Advocates, in my role with the East 12th Street Merchants Association, and as I served the city of Austin in various boards and commissions, I realized that the way that I was truly going to affect change, the way that I was actually going to live my dream, which was to be purposeful, was to affect policy. The mural at 12th and Chacon was sort of the impetus for a lot of this, in that we just didn't have any systems in place. There was no protocol to protect historic art in what is the historic African American Cultural Heritage District. There was that, and then watching people, be at risk. People who, by the way, who had been chronically homeless, who had been chronically food insecure, potentially lose their housing and potentially lose their access to food by way of us just not having policy in place that protected them. I approached our council and said, I have an idea. Could we have what I call a community quarterback, somebody who's taking a regular pulse of the community, a regular community needs assessment, figure out how we can help people preventatively. It would actually save the city money, realizing that that was something that I couldn't actually implement until I had the opportunity to represent on council and present it as a proposal. Was at least one of the reasons why I decided to run. Also, like I said, my daughters are watching me. They're watching all of us, how we treat one another, them getting dialed in from a federal perspective. They have so many questions about our president and things he says and does. And when I answer them, realizing that, from a municipal perspective, that these kids need to see us treat each other with civility, dignity, and respect, and knowing that I am a robust collaborator. I can work with anybody. If we're aiming at doing what's right and not being right, then I am absolutely here for it. And so having that be my motivation is probably the primary reason I'm running for office.
Okay. I guess maybe just pick an issue that's been a hot button issue at council. There's been Code Next, there's been paid sick leave, there's been ban the box, there's been gentrification is a big issue in District 1. The soccer stadium, any of those interest you or really upset you over the past few months? Or?
I'll talk about them all because they're all interconnected, just like cyclical poverty. You can't touch one thing without touching 19 things to actually affect change. So all of these things feed back to our lack of affordability, our housing crisis, and the fact that the city of Austin is still not moving forward as a major metropolitan city. We're moving like a township, and that's unfortunate. I think we need leadership that's going to be equal parts passion for our past and pragmatism for our future. So all of those issues are important to me, but they all dial directly back to affordability, to transportation, and to equity in the city of Austin. As we discuss equity, it's very important to recognize that out of the 5 council seats that are up for re-election, you only see black people in one race. That's D1, because we are still dealing with the last vestiges of racism in the city of Austin. We are still abiding by the gentleman's agreement that was implemented in the 20s. And the fact of the matter is, I'm the only black woman running for office. Out of 29 people running for municipal office in the city of Austin, I'm the only one. We have to fix that and we have to change that, but we don't do that if we don't talk about it. I'd love to talk about the ability for us to be more intentional about how we create community, about amenities-driven development, considerate development that actually considers what it is that people need. We have to be intentional about how we create communities, old neighbors and new neighbors. You mentioned the G word earlier, but personally I don't use it. I talk about displacement from the perspective of how do we move forward in a way that's substantive and solutions-driven.
Do people in Austin prefer the word displacement? Or
I don't know that I can speak to what people prefer. I can say that as a person who is moving in this community every single day, my mother and all 5 of my siblings still live in D1. So I'm moving in all parts of this community. It's 46 square miles, 77,000 people, 4 school districts worth of people. I'm moving in these communities every day. And when I talk to people, I have found that the G word debilitates people's ability to talk about solutions-based, substantive dialogue. And so I just don't use it. I prefer to talk to people about the importance of being a really good new neighbor and being a really good old neighbor and taking care of one another and building upon the beautiful tapestry that is this gorgeous city that we live in. We are so fortunate to live in this beautiful city that offers so many things in the way of arts and culture, but we have to, as a community, come together and work collectively to make Austin the best it can be for our future.